What color is Jesus' skin?
That's a good question. I know that he's not European, that is for sure.
To be honest, I don't know. I know he's black.
I believe he was colorblind.
That's a good question. They said he had hair like wool, from my understanding, feet color of bronze.
Is Christianity white and oppressive? Why or why not?
Yes, it is. We would never know as black people, African Americans or whatever, about Christianity if it wasn't just only introduced to us, it was forced on us.
The origin of Christianity in Africa goes back, hundreds of years before even the advent of certain European societies. And so it absolutely has a very African history to it.
Do you think the Bible supports slavery?
No, I think that the Bible tells a story and slavery was a part of that story. And so that does not mean that it should be replicated. And it was a whole different time period even. So I do not think that the Bible necessarily justifies slavery, but it tells a story. And there's a lot of, good key points in there that we can take out of that story.
Welcome to another episode of Faith Under Construction, where faith is not fragile.
Shit's under construction.
That's right. I'm one of your co-hosts, Rasul Berry, and I'm with
Kristen Thorpe.
And we're excited to have these conversations where we put some things on the table that are important, especially in the context of people growing their faith in the African-American community. And, one thing I've said often that I rep hard, even though I live in New York City, I was born and raised in Philly. And that was very much a key component of my life. In particular, the other thing I talk about in my testimony is that my name, Rasul, is Arabic because my parents had joined the Nation of Islam at the time. For those that may not be aware, Nation of Islam is different than Orthodox Sunni Islam. It was started by a guy named Elijah Muhammad, who, among other things, kind of was teaching this kind of fusion of political black nationalism with, Islam mixed in there.
Yeah.
And one of the key things that he taught was that Christianity was a white man's religion, that phrase. Mm-hmm. And I can tell you that growing up, even though we didn't grow up very observant, that was something that I heard a lot, that, I saw growing up as a hip hop head. You oftentimes in videos would see the iconography of slavery and like some, white preacher essentially like trying to objectify or oppress black people and using Christianity to do that. So when I, became a believer right before my freshman year, that was something that I really struggled with. And then on top of that, I majored in Africana studies
that did not help
in college. And so this issue came up time and time again, and something I've thought a lot about. How have you thought about this topic or this issue?
Well, I went to a HBCU. So I remember my first course, my first African-American studies class, she was like, to be black is to be natural. And anything outside of that is just wrong. And it was Christianity was the white man's religion. Christianity is what supported slavery. And I was very torn because I'm like, I know good white people. I know good Christian white people. I was sharing earlier that I grew up in Catholic schools where there were, which I mean, in some ways that was the white man's religion, but it wasn't oppressive in those ways. So it was really confusing to me because that's not what I saw.
Right.
But it was almost like the more educated you became, the more you should know that you were actually being oppressed. So there was some tension there because it's like, well, I do believe I'm smart, and the more I read and the more I'm learning, now I'm confused because I'm like, is this faith that has been so important to me actually something that is being used to oppress me? And am I ignorant because I don't see that? Because that's what it is. It's like, you have to read, you're unlearned and you don't know. And I'm like, dang, I'm confused. So I felt confused. I don't think there was really a resolve until I got older and kind of figured out my own identity.
Yeah.
At that time, it was like, okay, this actually, not even as I got older and figured out my own identity, but as you get older and begin reading other thoughts, and have other influences, then you realize like, there's two sides to this story here.
Yeah, the big breakthrough moment for me actually was in African American literature class. We read the autobiography of Frederick Douglass.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of his book, in the appendix, after he's talked about how the injustices he's experienced, he even mentioned that after his enslaver had a quote unquote born again experience, that he became more violent to him.
Yeah.
And so at the end of his book, he has this, he explains himself and he says, look, just almost like this is me talking, paraphrasing, don't get it twisted. He said, I love the pure, peaceable Christianity of Christ. I therefore hate the man plundering, women stealing, hypocritical religion of this land. In fact, I call it the greatest of slanders or libels to call the religion of this land the Christianity of Christ. And that's where I saw, okay, there's categories and
Yeah.
insights that are being forgotten in terms of this conversation. But that's just one thing. This is a conversation laced with history, culture, justice, injustice. And I can't think of a better person, literally, that I know to help us shepherd us through this conversation than our guest for today. He's somebody that who's written multiple books on this and many other topics. He got his doctorate from Gordon-Conwell. The brother knows Greek and Hebrew, solid theologian, the curator of content across the board, including a general editor for Urban Apologetics, volumes 1 and 2. As just a list of one of a few. And he's the founding pastor at Epiphany Fellowship in my home city of Philly. So I am so excited to introduce to us and bring to the table Dr. Eric Mason. What's up, Doc?
Hey. Glad to be on here with you both. It's a blessing. Don't take it lightly. I count it a privilege to be on here. Shout out to all of the Faith Under Construction listeners and the Daily Bread family. I grew up in the United Methodist Church. And so one thing that was going to be on the table in the vestibule, you got to call it a vestibule, not the hallway or the lobby. It was
The
called the
vestibule.
vestibule. You have your, they called it in the United Method. They said that your dues, where you get your personal dues, which is your tithes and offering envelope box for the year or for the month, and then and then beside it was our daily bread. And so I can't tell you how many of those I've read over the years and have been devotionally impacted by our daily bread. And so shout out to them.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks. That's cool. I love how we all have these stories where we can kind of interact in our different points of our faith formation, with the devotional. But as I mentioned, Dr. Mason, you have written on this topic and discussed it. I'm curious about how and why you arrived at a place where you thought this was important to address in terms of this answering this question: is Christianity a white man's religion?
Yeah. So again, thank you for inviting me on. So one of the, like she mentioned, I don't know if we were recording at that point, but she talked about going to a HBCU. You got to understand, I went to HBCU in the early '90s, like 1991. It was the worst time on the planet to be a Christian. Like it, I mean, on a black college campus, you know, it was almost like you were the dumbest of people on the planet, because you had fight the power, you had leaders of the new school, you had poor righteous teachers, you had Big Daddy Kane, you even had Ice Cube, who I think was a 5% like for a tidbit of a minute, and he put out, like, he had this skit on his album about talking to this Christian dude and him looking up at the sky. He said, "So you don't need that," and it was kind of like something to be made fun of, right? And when I became and so I dabbled in. I read Metanetta, Yale African Holistic Health, Message to the Black Man, How to Eat to Live, all of the, ruins of an empire by Count Valley, destruction of a civilization, 16 crucified saviors. I mean, I can go on with all of the things, from what you call it, from Timbuktu to, I forgot. Anyway, But it was so many books that like we used to have the stands out in the lobby of the school, in the student union. They were selling incense with the little wood holder things on them in the books, and then they had the soap without the animal, the animal fatted and stuff, and everybody, and then every people had on kufis and wearing Blue Nile and sandalwood fragrances and cool water and obsession, all the things, right? Made them in the oils. So I know I'm dating myself. Y'all, so y'all
Oh,
don't know what I'm
I'm
talking
No,
there
the
with you though.
sandalwood is
Yeah,
yeah,
that smell
that's a
still
staple.
associates me with Hotep
Yeah,
vibes all day.
Grand
Yeah.
Rising.
So one of the things that when so I became a believer during that time, and a guy that I had because I was in a fraternity when I was in college. So one of the guys was on my line. He was in Nation of Islam, and so he was just whacking at Christianity, all the time. And it was mad 5%. All the 5%ers on my campus were thugs. So they fight you if you tried to talk about any. I mean, they were like violent, weed smokers, drinkers, all the things. So I become a believer, I start walking with the Lord, and I'm defending the faith like in the student union by myself with like 30 people around me and like 5 people coming at me. And I'm a babe in Christ, and so I'm trying to study what I can. I don't have access to like Carl Ellis and at that time Heyman Cross, so I didn't have access to those guys. And But then I just knew that I said I can't give a full answer for this historically, but I know that this faith is real. I just don't have all the answers for them. But then Blacks in the Bible came out, and so I was like, Dr. Evans put one out, McKissick put one out, and the other brother put some out. I can't remember his last name, something, and that was like gold for us. So we started working on that. Then my last year of college went to Impact '94, and when I went there and I saw all these African Americans, I couldn't believe it. Then all these books was there from these Christians. I was like, this is actual. I knew it. I knew it. I knew it. And so I ended up going to seminary studying. And so to make a long story short, probably around when Trayvon Martin was killed, the whole idea of Christianity being a white man's religion came up again because of the far right evangelical responses to his death. And so, because people view far right evangelicalism as the mascot of Christianity in the West, they view all Christianity as having this ethical belief about black people, about slavery, about history. And so they basically began to they see the church as complicit in the current and past conditions of black people for the last 400 years. And so, as you know, racial issues come up like this every 20, 30 years. But the difference is this time is that we have the internet. And so narratives can last longer, live longer, and go farther. So, so it just became crazy. And then as African Americans who were in conservative, not far right spaces, but conservative evangelical spaces, were confused because white evangelicals was denying that race exists. And then we had and so everybody started doing deep dives, into understanding history. And so there were works out there that already had it. And then all of a sudden it started coming up that, you know who were we before we came to America? And then we started going back further, and people started saying, yo, the church fathers were black. And we was like, or African at least, and people of color at the least. And so people began to begin digging into that, and then going over the years, and then different groups started coming up. Like I started doing Thriving. You had Urban Perspective by Jerome Gay. You had Jude 3 by Lisa Fields. Oh no, they're gonna kill me. You got Adam with True ID. You have Alfredo Valentino with his channel. You had all of these channels, and Apologetics started coming out because we were just getting bombarded. The memes online was crazy. It was so much pseudo information. And then Sonetta TV was blowing up. Then you had Brother Polite. you had all of these people that were just, you had the Ben X and all of these cats coming out of the woodwork talking about Christianity, white man's religion. Then you had the I used to be a pastor culture, the ex-pastor thing. So it was like and so a lot of us who are theologically conservative, but have theology that doesn't view social justice as CRT, but a biblical outworking of the gospel, while not denying regeneration by grace through faith alone as the way you get saved, right? But we didn't find the balances in the evangelical spaces that reflected the quadrilateral. The quadrilateral said we value the Bible. The quadrilateral says we value missions work. The quadrilateral says we value activism and crucicentrism. So a part of being an evangelical is being about social change, not separate from it, without giving away our bibliocentrism or Christcentrism or crucicentrism, right? And so without doing that, and so we was like, we're just gonna not call ourselves evangelicals, but we're gonna do what we're supposed to do biblically by walking in a biblical two-sided coin, like in Titus 2, it talks about regeneration, but an outworking of our regeneration applies in chapter 3, where it impacts what we do. Regeneration isn't just to get saved and to go to heaven, it's also to impact the flourishing of other people while we're here. That's why it says in chapter 3, verse 1 through 2, talk about help the city that you're in leadership and government flourish. And then it says in verse 14, let our people learn to engage in meeting pressing needs in order that they may not be found unfruitful. So we should be proclaiming and practicing the gospel. And so from that, I hope I answered your question. From that is where I felt a responsibility to begin writing on these issues, which are woke church. I know people hate the word woke now, but it was ours first before the left stole it and then the right redefined it. But I've been wanting to write on these issues because our people need a biblical and ethical catalog so that the next generation won't have to do the heavy lifting of finding stuff that we have to do. And so that's why one of the things I like doing is empowering people. So everybody in my books, I told them, I said, when I was general editor, I said, I'm going to general edit this book. I'm going to let you be a specialist on this chapter. But one of the things I want you to do is I want you to take your chapter and make it into a larger book. And so whether they're a spiritual child or a person that is connected to me. So I say African Americans, we got to write, and we got to write biblically, historically accurate, socially responsible material. So and so I'm glad that God seems to be doing a movement like that, where so many people are being able to do it, and more responsible podcasts are out. So now, if you put in Christianity is the white man's religion, now you're not just going to get the people who left Christianity or the people that bash Christianity. Now, when you search that, a litany of things come up in your search on YouTube and in your hashtags on TikTok and Instagram that now combats that. And there are whole channels, which I thank God for, that are dedicated to this. And so this issue is something that we're still fighting. But one of the things that I like now is that it seems that I'll say the urban apologetics movement, which didn't start with us, it started with those who came before us. You know what I'm saying? That now it's normal now for African American believers to be equipped with it now. Like, it's almost like you're still on that. It's like
No, really, that's how I feel.
yeah, it's like, oh, poor you. You still believe Christianity is the white man's religion. You still think Christianity was forced on us during slavery, when they didn't want us to become Christians, because they would say if we became Christians, we would be unslavable. Like, so, like, because we would read the Bible and understand that this is some foolishness. So
Doc, let me pause you there, because you dropped a whole truckload
Yes.
of insights and gems, and I want us to be able to digest it. So thank you for that. I mean, very thorough breakdown of your journey, of the whole journey of like how this issue has come up over time in different ways. And there was somebody you mentioned, and you also gave a lot of great shout outs to some incredible writers and thinkers. And I know even at the Thriving Conference that you honored Carl Ellis a few years back. Dr. Ellis was one of those early writers that kind of was talking. There's a book, Beyond Liberation, Free at Last, that he wrote. And one of the things that he helped break down, and this is because it is almost like such a different situation where we have so much more access to information, that it can sometimes get lost about the why behind why was this so potent. And I would love for you to get your take on this, but one of the things that Dr. Ellis kind of emphasized was that in terms of when you dealing with the effects of over 400 years of marginalization, enslavement, discrimination, I mean, really, and we forget, like, right? If you talk about the first enslaved person arriving in the what is now the United States in 1619, to all right, slavery ends officially 1865 too, but then you still have a race-based system of segregation that goes until 1965. Right now, you're talking about my parent, like my mom can remember segregation, right? Like that is a big sociological, psychological, spiritual reality that has kind of impacted things. So the thing that Ellis helped with was understanding that there's this issue of identity that's kind of bound up in this question of what does it mean to be even the word black, which was a attempt to embrace a sense of a culture where it was marginalized in the world. Identity, sense of significance when you're told you're not worth anything. Even when I think about the black and white pictures we see of the Memphis sanitation workers protesting, and they have this sign, "I am a man."
Yeah.
And the fact that you would even have to assert that basic level, it shows that they're pushing back against an idea that you're not a man. And then the last one was significance, like that there's actually worth and purpose that I have that is actually rooted in a biblical narrative of the Imago Dei and who we are. But those are the three things that I think Ellis says we have to assert because they've been undermined for so long. So maybe if you could just kind of speak to like what like why this issue has so much staying power in light of some of those things historically that and maybe that are kind of framed in the way that Ellis did with identity, meaning, and significance.
One of the things that white Christians did in England, the Church of England, and otherwise, I'll just say that, and then in this country, was there was a dignity in order to enslave us and create chattel slavery. You had to and justify it, and it, without running to the Bible, is make us subhuman. So if we're not human, we don't have a soul. If we don't have soul, we're just an animal, so we can be property, right? And so when you look at this whole idea of dignity destruction, there has been nothing but dignity destruction. I mean, I got a book. I wish I had it from downstairs in my other library, but it's a book of this lawyer, a Christian lawyer that, so-called Christian lawyer that wrote a book that basically was the doctrine of destroying the dignity of black people. Like it has a whole like an origin story. It's weird. And they would train pastors, leaders, and people in this so that they could justify their subjugation of black people. Even post Reconstruction, there was propaganda in the movies. If you look at old Mickey Mouse movies and you look at cowboy Indian stuff, there was always different types of propaganda to kind of stereotype us. The type of roles that we were able to have. What's happened though on the other side is there have been other attempts to restore our dignity when the church refused to root our dignity in that. So you got in the late 1800s, I believe his name is William Seymour, and he was a guy that wanted to try to do that. The Church of God in Christ tried to do that through Bishop Mason, through merging the cultural expressions of blacks as them coming out of Africa and redeeming them and not using the worship practices, but using expressions. That's where the shouting culture come from. That's where the dun, 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 all that, right? And so all that comes from in our culture. But then you had a guy named Noble Drew Ali, who started the Morris Science Temple in Chicago, Illinois, which was now a fusion of Christianity, Eastern mysticism, Egyptology, and Christianity. And basically, he began to teach us that we're the original man, Asiatic black man. Then from there, Farad Muhammad and Elijah Muhammad learned from them. Then in 35, they created the Nation of Islam. Once they created the Nation of Islam, they began to. I mean, if you read the Message of the Black Man, it is basically a anti-Christian document. Half of the book is just is deconstructing black people away from Christianity by creating a false etymology and epistemology of both God and humanity, right? And so basically, he says God is a man. Listen, you're a God, but ultimately God is not spirit. And so that's like Jesus is, and God is spirit, and those who worship him is the spirit and truth. He basically goes against, like, it's like everything he says is anti-Christianity based. So in order to exist, in order for the Nation of Islam to exist, there has to be a Christianity for them to have something to define against, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so, but then while they're borrowing Western philosophical constructs from Christianity, borrowing to argue against Christianity, which is a whole nother issue. So, but what happened is the Nation of Islam became the avatar of black dignity, right?
Yeah.
So when you have Malcolm X, when you have
Muhammad Ali.
And they tried to get Kareem, but Kareem was like, "Nah, I know what y'all trying to do." And then and then you have Farrakhan, and then you have the conscious community. John Henry Clark, they borrowed from white 18th century mystics to try to redeem our dignity through their use of their false information of non-historians to talk about Christianity being stolen from black people. So white Christians don't realize there is an entire, like, because people was like, why are you doing something called urban apologetics? Why are you doing all this stuff? I said, y'all don't realize y'all arguing about the gap theory. I said, y'all arguing about, like, the Jesus seminar. I said, man, our people are thinking about where we came from. What is a fee? Why women should be valuable? How can we get our family back together? They're looking at what Carl Ellis calls co-cultural concerns. And so when you look at all of that, and in answering your question why black dignity so much, all of these people have falsely put band-aids on our identity by creating false history. So you got the Hebrew Israelites to say we the original Hebrews. You got the Hoteps, the Kemetics saying that we're the original Egyptians. You got the Moors, Simple as Sign, say we were the original rulers of Europe because we were from Spain, so we were the Moors. And then you got you got going down the line. Everybody got us being somebody else. And so what they're trying to do is overwrite white history with a mythological cosplay history, right? So what ends up happening is dignity isn't restored; it's actually reinforced into delusional destruction. But we have to utilize. We don't restore dignity in skin first. You don't start with skin. Because if you're starting with skin, you're responding to white supremacy. You don't you start with the imago Dei. All of us are created as image bearers. That's where we start. And then from being an image bearer, you can go to valuing all of our ethnic makeup, which God created based on Ephesians chapter 3, where he declared all the families of the earth. And Acts 17 says he decided our boundaries and where we would be born. Now we're going to equate the value of everybody. All of us have value. And now I have my dignity restored because God created me this way. And I think that it's very important to make sure that when you're reconstructing something like this very sensitively, it helps. And so I have people that in my church have converted who have been witches because they thought that being a witch was their original faith. Now that we baptized them last year, we baptized several Muslims. We baptized some Hebrew Israelites who come to the faith, and they put their confidence in Jesus Christ again. And so I had somebody hit us up recently saying, "Hey man, If it wasn't for the work that different ones of you all were doing, Damon Richardson, all Jerome Gay, with that helped bring me out of it, because now I understood that the gospel restores my dignity, not these other cosplay activities that will restore my dignity.
Wow. A couple key things, the understanding, and thank you for correcting me. Identity, dignity, and significance were the three pillars that Mace. And I'm curious, Kristen, when you think about this, right, as somebody who grew up, in church, but also at a HBCU at a different time that Dr. Mason did, how did this topic become relevant or significant at all to you?
I think it was really, as I stated, seemed as ignorance. To be a Christian was to be ignorant, to believe in the Spirit of God and the things of the Spirit were ignorant. And there wasn't urban apologetics. There weren't these spaces for us to speak to these things. So then we wrestled. And I know I came back, black and proud. When I came back home from my first year of college, my mom was like, all right now, like Jesus is still the way. And I'm like, yeah, Mom, but this is what the white man did, and they used the Bible to justify slavery and all these things. But in the same way, I was never taught that the Bible was misused.
Right.
Like they were presenting it to me like this was the Holy Bible, and not teaching about the slave Bible. They weren't sharing that there were pieces that were taken out that spoke to liberty and that spoke to justice. So here I am thinking that, as someone, I told you, I studied social work.
Mm.
I started in political science, so I was a justice girly. Like I was a kid, fighting for Sudan and Rwanda, in high school. So I was very justice oriented. So there was a lot of tension where I'm trying to figure out, you know, I I feel this call for justice, and now I know like there was some holy indignation around that. Like,
Right.
this is the Holy Spirit causing me to stand up for the least of these.
Mm.
And this is biblical.
Mm.
This is not, some idea um that I got from my blackness. This is what I got from the Imago Dei. You know what I mean?
Right.
This passion for justice came from my foundation, and growing up in church. It came from my understanding that this is my role. But when I went to school, it was like to really be about the cause
Mm.
means to walk away from Christianity. So I think I was really torn for a very, very long time. But again, I really appreciate your point to say we need more Black writers.
Mm.
Because even then, when I was educated, and I went to a very liberal
Mm.
seminary, when I was coming back into faith, I was coming back to a faith, and I was exposed to a faith that was leaning more towards, instead of it being the white man's religion, it made it the Black man's religion,
Mm.
instead of it being a religion in the
Yeah.
image of God. You know what I'm saying?
Connection that you made in terms of how we reconstruct something that was constructed in a wrong way. So it's very
Yeah.
easy to have a punch be I'm creating and teaching a theology that puts my race as the pinnacle of human existence, puts your race as the very bottom, even barely human at all. And that is the way that I'm using to justify, all of this oppression. It's very easy to try to counter that with, no, actually, the ones that you're saying on the bottom are actually on the top, and the ones that are on the top are
Right.
actually on the bottom. And instead, that's not a careful, and that neither of those are faithful to the text. That
Yeah.
there's something that has to go, okay, no, actually, it's not by might or power, but by my spirit, right? Like,
Yep.
so that the whole ethnographic history of the Bible is actually nobody is righteous. Like nobody, but there's
Yeah.
something that God is constructing beyond. So speaking of the scriptures, Dr. Mason, and I know you alluded to some of the significance of Dwight McKissick's works, Blacks in the Bible, and you also talked about the early church fathers. What has been the value and the significance that you've seen of helping people, I guess relearn or remove the miseducation of even how we got the faith that we now hold to, right? Either by who's on the pages of the Bible and what they look like when they see movies and pictures on the frames and all this that look like, was it Jesus from Norway, not Jesus from Nazareth? Like, tell us about how you've seen that, and even the reappropriation of even some of the church fathers as well.
Yeah, so let me address something that was said earlier. The whole Black Man's Religion. There was a book written by Glenn Ushery and Craig S. Keener called Black Man's Religion, and it's called Can Christianity Be Afrocentric, which is interesting. And when they use the term Black Man's Religion, it's like the way we use Black Lives Matter, right? So we're not saying all lives don't matter. We're just saying add blacks to that. And so I think that they tried to use it as I think what you're talking about, people have taken it too far. It's only for black people. But I do think that like one of the things that attracts people to just even Christian black guys to black people to Islam in general is because Islam is not just a religion, it's a culture. So it almost feels like in Philly, y'all know, y'all from here, it's crazy. But it almost feels like you're getting something foreign when you join another language and another culture and that kind of thing. And so I think that's important to understand. But anyway, I want to come back to your question. Can you ask that question for me, Rasul,
Yes,
in real succinct
absolutely.
way? But I wanted because that was on my mind
Thank
as
you.
y'all were talking. Yep,
Yeah,
yep,
no, I
yep.
think words matter and definitions matter. So sometimes, even when, and I love that book, part one and part two. I actually like Defending Black Faith was like my
It's
manual.
better.
I kept
It's better
on,
than Black Man's
I
Religion
kept
for
that
me.
thing on campus. That half the book was footnotes. It was amazing. Like,
Yeah, it's cool.
yeah. So shout out to Keener and Usry for doing that. But what we were asking was, you've alluded to in different ways, you know, works that either sought to dispel myths that were really culturally supported myths. When you watch the Ten Commandments on Easter, or when you see different films and depictions, paintings of Jesus, that it did seem to support and reinforce this idea that, look, all these people in this story are white. There's no place for you in this story. So either between that, as well as the even early theologians and ancient, church fathers, mothers, all of that. And so there was been this effort to reclaim that. So I just wanted to give you an opportunity to kind of speak to, like, even the persons who were involved with the development of the faith itself, either in the pages of scripture or the first, folks who took those scriptures and helped expound on things that we now know of as the church. Like, why is that important, and what did you find that kind of supported a reconstructed vision of the faith that wasn't so much dominated by one particular culture or people?
Yeah, I just pulled up a article by J. Daniel Hayes. Is the name of the article is called Racial Bias in the Academy. Still, dot, 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 still. And one of the things that so nobody could fuss with him, and not many people have seen this article, but he said it's widely known in academy that racism undergirds iconography, um, word choices that we use to describe black people from the Bible to cloak their ethnic. But it's a great article. I'll send it to you. But man, and so I think that it's been a concerted effort. I think to basically not. Again, we're not trying to paint the Bible black. That's not even like what it's about. We're just talking about. We're not even saying Jesus was blue, black, Nubian, from sub-Saharan Africa, But what we are saying is that we need to understand that when you are subjugating people, when you are dealing with them in a particular way. See, an Indian, like I'm not talking about Native American. I'm talking about Indian, an East Indian, a probably an Aboriginal from Australia, a Hispanic person from Europe, or Asian is not going to see white iconography the way blacks see white iconography.
Mm,
You know what I'm saying?
it's not as
They're going to
oppressive.
just see it as, oh, I'm in their country. They're just painting them that way, right? with us, we see it as an attack on us.
Yeah.
And because there's been a concerted effort for centuries, this is just another part of it. How do I know that? Because the big question is, why do y'all paint Jesus? That the people, this is non-Christians asking us this. It's not even Christians trying to be woke. It's like it's black people that's saying, you know, why if, like I even read, I was on the Perry's and they had the 5% dude. I forgot his name. I'll look it up. But he basically was like, we teach his alternative. He said, Jesus, why is it always painted white in all the churches? He said, we teach the black man that he is God. So you are the Christ, right? And so I think that, and I hope I'm answering your question, but I just think that it is of great importance and value, particularly with a podcast like this, to know that the missiological issues in the black community is vastly different than in other communities. And it's in the diaspora. Last year, I was in London. This year, I was in South Africa. In South Africa in the conference, so I didn't know this, but they had gotten copies of my book in South Africa, Urban Apologetics, and they had been doing studies and in England too. And they were saying there's some differences, but we're dealing with, we got people over here, Hebrew Israelites are coming. He said Umar Johnson and different ones are coming over there disturbing people's whole faith, and they're going back to African religions, right? And so they were saying we really need apologetics because our people don't value our dignity destruction. Post-apartheid has impacted, just like slavery, Jim Crow, black codes, and systemic racism has impacted you all the same way the history of apartheid in this country has caused trauma for the view of ourselves, and they see Christianity as a partner in their dignity destruction. Same thing in England, because a lot of the people in England are from Africa or the Caribbean, and so that dignity destruction that came from colonialism that they remember from their parents, from them being second generationers, and those who are from the islands who experience the impact of the post-chattel slavery. Like it's a global phenomenon, and they're saying I could not believe when I was in South Africa what they had to do classes on is African religions compatible with Christianity, and like they have to do classes on that. Why? Because
Can you answer that? Because I'm sure we have some listeners who are in that tension and they're like, yeah, I could do both.
I would say that they would say that there are redeemable things within it and there are unredeemable things within it. Like, so I forgot what they say. If it's twins and they die, the twin has to go lay on top of the twin's body so that his soul can pass to the afterlife to the ancestors. That's just one thing. So I'm not doing that. He'll say I'm not doing that. They wear tribal necklaces and these beads around their head. I wish I had them with me. It's at my house. And it represents a certain thing, but they have redemptive things to it. So like the Coptic church, for instance, right? The Ankh, y'all know the Ankh is, right?
Right. The
Okay,
loop, the cross with the loop at the top.
Yeah. So yeah, they view that as life. The woman and the man together. That's what the Ankh is, right? The symbol for it. So when Coptic Christians became believers, if you go to the Museum of the Bible, they'll do a Coptic cross that they use the Ankh for as a way to be a bridge to showing them that the cross is life. So as long as they're not using it as a symbol of invoking incantations, but a sign of life. So you have to take it case by case based on how embedded that particular thing is in culture and its redeemability to communicate a redemptive theme or be neutral, right? So I think that was there in pertaining to that. But going back to what we were saying, they said, we follow you all. They said, African Americans, you all are the global image and character leaders for the diaspora. And they said, we follow your hip hop. We follow your clothing. We follow, like, if you're becoming middle class, we follow your drip, everything y'all, and we follow your ideologies, right? So like if you're moving into certain things ideologically, we're going to begin exploring it because we view you as the leaders we view you as the avatar of blackness. And so because they say they respect, there's so much respect for our journey through all we've gone through, and to see us thriving in their mind, like they see they're inspired by it. And so now we know going over there was me kind of letting them know, but you have to be discerning on what you cop from us. So, you know what I'm saying?
Amen.
So I have a question so I think we've determined that Christianity isn't the white man's religion, but for someone who may be struggling or coming back to the faith after being maybe a Hebrew Israelite, or just becoming an intellectual too wise um, for our own good, where does race play in the Bible and in the story for Black people?
In what sense?
Well, I'll say, if it's not the white man's religion, whose religion is it?
So let's follow the story of the Bible. God's original intent was to create a global community of Yahweh worshipers. Man decided that he didn't want to do it the God's way. Adam and Eve messed things up. Then, of course, sin got worse, but God still had the same goal of unifying people under him. The Tower of Babel was an attempt to be legalistic about getting to God without connect heaven and earth without God.
Mm-hmm.
So God chose Israel to be his missionary, to be a cultic community, and I mean cultic in the good sense, to be salt and light to the earth, to draw the nations back to Yahweh. The nations, they failed. Therefore, true Israel in the person of Jesus Christ comes, and he does as the one Israelite that millions of Israelites couldn't do by dying on the cross and getting up from the grave. Ephesians 2, tearing down the dividing wall and putting us all into a unified community as one people of God, not replacement theology, but the Israel being a part of God's ecclesia, and Gentiles being a part of ecclesia. So we lost our unity at the Tower of Babel through language dispersion, but at the day of Pentecost, God used languages to bring us back together.
Oh, that's good.
Then you have in Revelation 7 all of those languages that God dispersed at Babel and probably changed over the years. Now is before the throne. Those languages that were a sign of disunity are now saying the same thing in their particular language before the Lamb, worshiping him. So who's Christianity for? It's from the beginning. Let's say Christianity is what it means to be in a relationship with God. God wanted all humans in a relationship with him. And in Christ, that is possible if you place your confidence in him and him alone for salvation. And so I believe that our journey with Christianity, in particular as African Americans, is very, very unique than most people in the world, because it was outside of the Crusades, that like Christianity and being conquered came together. So like when other people when like barbarians weren't fighting, even though I know Europe was trying to say the barbarians and they were the godless and but it's not the same. Like fundamentally, Christianity was used as a fundamental tool to justify everything about us in a way that no conquered people has ever experienced in their life. Even when you look in the Bible, um, even though certain religions, like before Darius, we got Nebuchadnezzar and them, like they didn't. You it's certain things you couldn't do with your faith, but they didn't change your ethnicity. They change your name. They wouldn't wipe out your history. Like it's just a different animal when it comes to us. And so I believe that we're trying to do what Rasul was talking about earlier through that famous Frederick Douglass quote, is we're trying to pry, not even necessarily pry, but separate the difference between what's biblical Christianity and what's Western cultural Christianity.
That's good.
Yeah, and I mean, my mind is going in so many different directions. I mean, because so much of this conversation and this story is something that is like my lived actual experience and journey, and again, one that has been very much supported and aided by many of the same people that Dr. Mason mentioned, and you as well, Dr. Mason. One thing I also would just want to add, like another log to that fire, in terms of that question of like, what is the right treatment of race or ethnicity, so in terms of from a biblical standpoint. I mean, one, after we acknowledge that race is socially constructed, right, that doesn't appear in the Bible, but we do see nations, which is translated from the Greek word ethnos, where we get ethnicity from. And so there is this story that is often layered, and especially when we get to the church age, when you start talking about the core tension that we see in the book of Acts, which is, as Dr. Mason laid out, the, at the day of Pentecost, the kind of reversal of the Tower of Babel, right? But then everything that follows the book of Acts is really this question of, how does this work, right? How do people who are descendants of the chosen group, the Israel, merge with the Gentiles, and live together in this way? And you have these moments of conflict, and I think one of the most significant ones that I think of is Acts chapter 6, right? That takes place right after the growth of the church. You see in at the end of Acts chapter 2, at 4, and then the church grew and had favor, and they were sharing things, and then all of a sudden you get this conflict that happens between Hellenistic Jewish widows being excluded from Hebraic. And there's a racial and a sociological element to that, because Hebraic Jews were the ones that they were the Galileans and the Judeans, and they looked a certain way. And then the dispersion had been mixed with the various different people groups around the Greco-Roman world. And so when this issue happens, the thing that's so significant is the disciples, who were themselves Hebraic, right? They were, good old country boys from Galilee. They decide to address the issue. First of all, they don't ignore it. They don't say, "Hey, this is a distraction from the gospel." They address the issue, and they say, "Look, we have to stay committed to the word, but we're going to appoint people. This is where deacons come from, to serve and to meet the need." And the fascinating thing is, they did so with an understanding of the historical context, because we know from the names of the people that they suggested, including Stephen and Timonis and all these others, that they were Hellenistic Jews themselves, like you said, with the Greek names. And so I think that moment gives us a point of clarity of seeing that while from a biblical standpoint, we're all one under the cross, and in fact, that is the entire point of the story, there is this sense where that doesn't mean that we can't address the issues from the past, and we can't address, and actually that we should, in the same way that we saw in Acts 6, because the only way to address the irrevocable, there we go, irrevocable harm that Dr. Mason talked about is actually to address it and to kind of fix it, and to try to mend things. And I'm so grateful for your work doing that. The one last thing I'm curious.
Hold on, before you say that.
Yeah.
Because you brought something, you made me think of something, because it was something I wanted to finish, because I forgot it when I answered the first part of it. One of the things, real quick, like when people say ethnicity doesn't matter, it's no way you read the Bible. Like the gospel doesn't erase ethnicity. So why does God spend so much time talking about tribes? Notice I didn't say race, I said ethnicity. Tribes and people groups, and he was of them, and she was from this tribe. Like from Genesis to Revelation, you can only count on your one hand a book that doesn't name an ethnicity in the book. Which means if God goes through extra length to talk about ethnicity, we have to stop letting the false social construct of race impact the beauty of us embracing and enjoying the differences that God, the great artist, has placed on the planet. And I think that's so important. We can't say, well, ethnicity doesn't matter. It's like, no, Galatians isn't, when he says that in Galatians 5, he's not saying ethnicity doesn't matter. He's just saying it doesn't save you.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? That's the point of the passage. Is you're saved by grace, not race. So you know what I'm saying.
Ooh,
So
that's good.
yeah,
And I think people really have to find that balance between celebrating your culture but not necessarily being a slave to your culture. Cuz
absolutely.
people can get more caught up in race that you're not being Christ-like.
Right.
You're so busy fighting the cause,
Right.
but what's the cause? Is it the
Yeah.
cause of Christ, or is it the
Yeah.
cause of your religion? And yes, you want to seek the peace and prosperity of the city. That's biblical. But in the same token, it does not come from a standpoint of prioritizing your race over the things of God. And I think that is a tension that so many people have because they see them as separate.
Right.
So when I am pursuing justice is biblical.
Yeah.
But when I am race baiting, or where I am, trying to put my race above another race, that's not
Yeah,
Christ-like.
that's good. I'm glad you mentioned it. And Dr. Mason, I'm so grateful that you talked about the South African context and the UK context as well. I decided intentionally to wear this shirt from Ghana today. I got exposed to it. There's a brother named Tim Swain who repatriated over there, but of course Ghana is a huge player in this story. Many people go to the castle right there in Accra that was the point of no return for so many of our ancestors and formerly enslaved people who came in on slave ships from that very castle, where there was a chapel built on top of where the enslaved were kept. So when we talk about these complexities, in many ways this is an international conversation, and yet at the same time, I also have gone to South Africa and have seen the resonance and even inspiration behind the story. Like when you talk about, like Nelson Mandela was reading Martin Luther King Jr. He was reading W.E.B. Du Bois in prison, right? Like being inspired to kind of up in, the racialized system there that was also the church was used, Dutch Reformed Church was used to justify apartheid, right? So these things were very much interwoven, and yet at the same time, when we carefully, remove the lies from the truth, and we get to the beauty that remains, it does create this opportunity, and even the passion that you see from Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass, the list goes on. What I actually saw when I started to like study was that actually I can find many of the people who are the freedom fighters that we know were inspired by their faith. Sojourner
Yeah.
Truth, that wasn't her
Right.
birth name.
Right.
It was Isabella Baumfree. She had a vision of Jesus. She converts, and then she walks out of the place that in which she was enslaved, and she had this vision that said, your name is going to be Sojourner Truth, because you're going to be a sojourner for my truth.
Mm-hmm.
And based on the power of that vision, becomes the first Black person to win a case in the court to get her kids out of the bondage that they were in. And so, I think so the ironic thing is it kind of flipped on its head. And when I actually saw it and realized, actually, this has been a core source of power and inspiration, the gospel meaning, in our people, not the kind of, but there is a version of the truth that was distorted to try to be used to oppress. So my last question was just going to be this, Doc. You know, we got just a few minutes left, but like, what are the practical implications of this? Like, so we've talked a lot about the internal, the historical. How does this truth play itself out in terms of how you do ministry in Philly at Epiphany, how we ought to think about what we do with this, especially in a complex world and where these same themes are still pulling and tugging at each other?
Yeah, one of the things that, of course, we teach in the fundamentals, but also I do a lot of reels. As a pastor, I use technology. And so I deal with the specific questions that they're struggling with. Is Christianity the white man's religion? Like I got a list of them. So under my reels, I'm putting on my Instagram page. So I do stuff on and offline to kind of shepherd my people. So I did a video on, are Black people, are we gods? I did that. I did, the letter J, is Jesus' name Zeus? So what I do is I try to I take questions that people have and treat them like a survey of the fact that other people need to hear more about that. And what I begin to do, I get questions, and if that question comes up enough, I use reels as a way of doing a FAQ deal, right? But one of the things that I'm doing now, and this comes out at the end of the month. My next book is Rebranding the Church. Restoring the image of the people of God in the world. And one of the things with that comes with what we're talking about is helping you be a participant in actually being a change agent in this happening. One of the things that I'm really helping my people to be discipled in is stop consuming foolishness. There's a lot of conspiracy, if you're on TikTok alone, it's a bunch of conspiracy theorists on there, which most of the people that I know that deconverted from Christianity or deconstructed from 30 to 90-second videos, not reading. And so one of the things that I push people to do is be in the means of grace that help inform you. And so one of the things that we do here is we have a resource list that we use for our people, that these are the things that help you get in the fundamentals. We open ourselves up in discipleship for questions. So that's a huge thing. That's why we started the conference. It's coming in November, to help bring together, because we got so many questions. We said we got to do a conference. And then what I do is I invite a lot of people in to engage people specifically. I would encourage different churches and ministries is to do that. One guy, I was meeting with a pastor that just came to take over church here in Philly today earlier. Shout out to him. He said at the church he used to pastor in another state, he said things were so bad they had to have Urban Apologetics Month. And so on Sundays, they would do a very short worship set, and then they would have basically somebody in one of the topics of urban apologetics come on a Sunday, and basically, because sometimes when you have it on Wednesdays and everybody don't come, but you get everybody on Sunday. So we get them on Sunday, and then they have Q&A, and then they'll be able to interact. One of the things that I believe that the church has to constantly do is be in a constant state of learning. When you're in a constant state of learning, you will never plateau. And when you're in a constant state of learning, when I talk about learning, I'm not just talking about exegeting scripture. You have to exegete culture. What type of questions are the people that you're shepherding and ministering and discipling to are asking? That's why you have to have your Bible in one hand and your news feed in the other. You have to know what's going on so that you can know how to communicate those things to the people that you're shepherding, and developing resources. Now those resources are used by guys discipling other guys and gals discipling other girls in the church. And so I think that every ministry has to have a resource list that it's basically like your first aid kit. You know what I'm saying? Like kind of like a first aid kit. What do I know that's going to be the fundamental things, medicines that the people I'm ministering to need? And it could be your toolkit or first aid kit for the people that you're ministering to. And that's one thing that I would just really encourage.
That's good.
Oh man, so I heard stop consuming garbage.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. Stop going down those rabbit holes, because that sometimes you can get caught up. I've gotten caught up in rabbit holes
Yeah.
where I'm like, why has it been 30 minutes? And I'm just like,
Or I'll come out of a rabbit hole like, what do I believe? Who am I?
right. So stop consuming that. Also, make sure you consume the right things. And I love what you said about what were the means of grace that brought you into the faith, and continue to nurture in those things. From a church standpoint, create a resource list, a first aid kit. I like that.
I love that.
Because folks are in triage and in trauma, and also the trauma, right? Because we've talked about this from a very heady standpoint, but I think underneath this is the realization that these have been very traumatic things. When people are feeling a sense of lost identity, dignity, and significance, that there's these chasing after these other things are trauma responses, in many ways. And so resource lists, encouraging churches to actually help support the congregation by addressing these issues, and even the community as well. But thank you, and thank you for joining us for another edition of Faith Under Construction, where faith is not fragile,
Just under construction.
See you next time.